Hello and welcome to Auto Shenanigans. How the devil are you? Have you had a good week? My name is John. Thank you very much for joining me for another exciting Great British Road Journey. This week we'll be continuing our exploration of Hertfordshire. In the last episode we took in the delights of Hitchin, Letchworth, Ware, and Stevenage. Yeah, still, at least that's the worst of Hertfordshire dealt with, and surely today's journey promises to be a right treat. We'll be travelling from the capital of Hertfordshire, Hartford, to the lovely town of Tring, and on the way we'll be stopping by Hatfield and Berkhamstead. As always, to help navigate our way around, we'll be using my Michelin 1923 guidebook, period correct maps, and look, I know I take the mickey out of places like Stevenage, but it's just rubbish. Speaking of rubbish, Hartford, more specifically Hartford Castle. My guidebook suggests that it's worthy of a visit, but I'm not so sure on the basis that almost nothing remains of the aforementioned castle. It used to be a Norman castle built in the 1100s, but nothing remains of the original structure. The building we see today started out as the gatehouse and entrance to the castle, but in the late 1700s a new wing was added because its owner wanted to turn it into a mansion. Further extensions were made in the 1900s, leaving us with a building that's not a castle. However, whilst there's nothing left of the castle, there are some remains of the castle's outer flint wall that have escaped demolition or modification. It would have been built around the same time as the original castle, and it would have run round the entire castle's site with built-in watchtowers and defensive positions. My guidebook provides a handy map of Hertford, and I noticed something that's changed. According to the old map, we're missing a section of railway, and indeed, in 1951, the Welwyn Junction to Hertford Railway would close to passengers, with the tracks being lifted sometime later in the 1960s. But if you know where to look, you'll find a couple of reminders, like the two small bridges that the railway would have run underneath. One of the bridges is found on Balfour Street, and the other, which I think carries a footpath, is a short distance away. There's also this old railway bridge by Hartham Lane. Today it's been converted into a car park, but this old photo shows what it used to look like, just about. According to our old maps, there were a couple of sidings coming off the railway in this area, and they would have served the massive Michelin brewery situated where today we find a Sainsbury's. But whilst most of it has been redeveloped, some of the original brewery buildings built in 1890 still exist. The Michelin brewery was founded in Hartford in 1827, and by the end of the century was one of the largest brewers in the county, employing most of Hartford. And whilst things have certainly changed over the years, the independent company is still brewing beer in Hartford to this very day. Well, I'd say that's a very valuable contribution to society there, so well done Hartford, keep up the good work. As we head away from Hartford to our next destination, we'll be wanting to use the A414, but it's going to have to be a mix of old route and new because the A414 was upgraded to a dual carriageway, sometimes along the old roads alignment, sometimes not, but I'll cobble it all together as best I can. The most original part of the route is known today as the Old Coach Road, which will spit us out onto the modern A414, which will take us the rest of the way. To Hatfield! Oh dear. Like Stevenage in the days of my guidebook, Hatfield was probably a nice little town with a population of only around 5,000, and also like Stevenage was then mostly ruined when it was expanded as part of the government's new town plan. Hatfield is perhaps well known for two things: aircraft engineering and the Hatfield Tunnel on the A1. In the 1920s, when Michelin were busy making my guidebook, the A1 was better known as the Barnet Bypass, and when it came to Hatfield, it ran around the west of the town a little bit like this. However, in the 1970s, the A1 was upgraded to a motorway and became the A1M. Except in Hatfield, where it remained as the 1920s A1, but now with motorways at either end of it, which of course is a stupid idea, but it wasn't as simple as just connecting up two sections of motorway. To do so would have resulted in the mass demolition of Hatfield. Not necessarily a bad thing, but at the time this wasn't really desirable, so instead a tunnel was built underneath the town. The 1,200-metre long tunnel's construction would begin in 1984, and they used the same cut and cover technique as used on the M25 when building the Holmesdale and Bell Common tunnels. Interestingly, there's an excellent series on YouTube that looks at motorways in detail. Anyway, they banged the tunnel out in 2 years, and by 1986 it was open to traffic. But what about the aircraft engineering? For that, I've come to a field on the west side of Hatfield, but this is no ordinary field. This is where we'd have once found a massive airport set up by the de Havilland Aircraft Company. What was previously a farmer's field by the 1930s was a busy airport featuring several hangars, technical buildings and Art Deco-style administration buildings. Interestingly, it wouldn't be until after the second small disagreement that a proper hard runway was added. The year would have been 1947, and this was a time when jet-engined aircraft were really starting to take off. So a proper runway was needed. In 1949, de Havilland would trial their first prototype jet airliner known as the Comet. Its first flight was from Hatfield and lasted for around 30 minutes and was seen as a success. By 1952, production models of the aircraft were put into service, making it the first commercial jet airliner in the world, an amazing achievement by the company and, more importantly, the people of Hatfield. Today, it's all gone. By the 1990s, the airfield was under the ownership of British Aerospace, who were experiencing financial difficulties. Aircraft manufacture would end here in 1993 and the airfield would close in 1994. But there is the odd thing still lying about from the airfield days. For example, the number 14 outlined on the ground. This used to be one of the runways for the airfield, although I think it was only ever a short grass runway. And some of the taxiway still survives as a footpath which, if you follow along for a short distance, leads you to a patch of trees. And hiding behind that is this structure. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but I'm led to believe it's some sort of radio beacon or a VOR, maybe part of an ILS system, VDF, EDF, DHL, BP, don't know.
All right, great. I think we've managed to avoid the worst of Hatfield, so let's move on and we're going to drive along the A1057, which doesn't appear to have changed all that much since the old days, and by following the road it will deliver us into the city of St Albans.
Which is an absolute arse to drive around, so don't bother. I've come to Verulamium Park, which is on the west side of St Albans, at the recommendation of my guidebook, because it's here that we find the remains of a Roman city wall. Verulamium was a Roman city that officially existed as of the year 50 AD, but its roots are older still, having begun as an Iron Age settlement. The Roman city was the second largest in the country, making it a pretty big deal, and in the area today there are several Roman remains and museums to visit. The next town on our journey is Berkhamstead, which, like Hatfield, doesn't have the best reputation, but it does have the magic roundabout that's not the magic roundabout, and Hemel is perhaps best known for a massive explosion that occurred in 2005 at the Bunsfield oil depot found to the east side of Hemel near the M1. The depot opened in 1968 and was connected via pipeline to various refineries around the country so that it could accept fuel and oil into its storage tanks without the need to transport the fuel on the road. This would then be fed out via pipeline to places like Heathrow and Gatwick Airport, and until it exploded, it was the fifth largest oil depot in the country. So why did it explode? Well, it was down to a fuel spillage caused by an overflowing fuel tank. Fuel was being pumped into the storage tank from a refinery as per usual, but it didn't automatically shut off like it should do when the tank was full. The alarm system designed to detect this and alert staff also failed, and within 40 minutes over 300 tonnes of fuel spilled out, and for reasons I don't understand, this results in an air and fuel vapour forming which not only looks terrifying, it spreads an explosive fog far and wide, and yeah, it all exploded. Amazingly, no one died, and as you can imagine, it destroyed an awful lot of stuff, but sadly not Hemel.
Moving on from Hemel, and I think we only need one road to finish our journey. Today it's the A4251, but in the old days this was the A41 and the main road linking Hemel to Aylesbury. It's since been replaced with a bypass, at which point the road numbers were reassigned with the new bypass getting the A41 number, but in any case, following the A4251 or the old A41 will take us to our final destination of Tring via Berkhamstead.
Or Great Berkhamstead as my guidebook calls it, which is correct, but only up until 1937, at which point the name was simplified, something that locals had taken a step further by referring to Berkhamstead as Berko. I quite like Berko. Traffic's a bit of a nightmare, but it seems like a fairly nice place. We might struggle for things to do here though. My guidebook suggests that maybe we'd like to visit Berkhamstead Castle or maybe St Peter's Church, but we've sort of done castle shenanigans already and churches, meh. So instead, let's discuss trench warfare, which happened during the first small disagreement between 1914 and 1918. Thousands would sign up for involvement, which led to the creation of a massive training camp here in the fields alongside Berkhamstead, and by the end of its operation, over 12,000 officers would be trained here. Part of their training was about preparing them for the particular style of warfare, which led to nearly 8 miles of trenches being dug out. Most of these were filled in after 1918, but they missed a bit, meaning today we can visit these training trenches. It's probably fair to say that the fields and countryside by Berkhamstead were not really comparable to the front line in France. I wonder how many of the 12,000 that were trained here made it back. Places like this make you think, don't they? Our final stop for today's journey brings us to Tring, a nice little village with around 13,000 residents, but in the days of my guidebook this was far less at around 4,500. My guidebook suggests that maybe we'd like to take a visit to see the Tring Natural History Museum, but I don't have time to walk around, so instead I'll stand outside and tell you about it. The museum used to be a private collection owned by Lionel Walter, a member of the famous banking family, the Rothschilds. They constructed the buildings that we see today in 1889 specifically to house Lionel's collection of things, which would then open to the public in 1892. It's fair to say that Lionel was perhaps a bit of a nutter who spent his time here trying to breed horses and zebras in an effort to create zebroids. Oh, and here he is on the back of a zebra-drawn carriage. His collection at Tring contains many dead and then stuffed animals, some now extinct, probably because they were hunted and put into a museum, but it's a bit late now. There were also things like kangaroos, various birds, hippos like your mum, and in the late 1800s I imagine it was quite the spectacle. The museum and collection was handed over into public ownership, if that's the term, in 1937, but you can still visit it today and I highly recommend that you do. And there we are then guys, that's all we've got time for this week. Thanks very much for watching, I hope you liked the video. If you did, there is of course a button specifically for that, and if you haven't subscribed already, please consider doing so. That would be wicked sweet awesome. Enjoy the rest of your week, whatever it is you get up to. My name's John, you've been watching Auto Shenanigans, and I'll see you guys next time for another exciting Great British Road Journey. Until then, take care, bye bye.